You heard older people say, and probably still some younger people, I don't know, different people say, don't swear, don't swear, don't say I swear. And the same people, I realized I knew people like that would say, don't swear. But then they would be like, well, I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. I promise, I promise. Same thing. So we'll take a look at that here and how that relates to God. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian. It's a project about what it means to have a relationship with God and how do I live that out in practical life. Today is about God appreciation. And so in that, we look at James chapter 5 and verse 12, and we see our own inabilities. How many promises have you broken? I feel it's one of my weaknesses where I have good intentions and I say too much. The Bible warns over and over and over about speaking too much and controlling the tongue. And some of that too much talking is promising things or giving my word and not keeping it. And the Lord knows that as human beings, we struggle with that. And for those of you who think, well, I'll always keep my word. No, you've let people down too. Come on now. Let's use James chapter 5 to set the table, if you will. James chapter 5 and verse 12, but above all, my brothers, do not swear. Do not promise. That's exactly what it's talking about. Don't promise either by heaven or by earth. Jesus has said this as well. Or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. So you don't have to break your word. And you don't need to promise. You don't need that extra layer. My yes should be so powerful that you know if I say yes. We do this too. We check on each other, right? We say, well, I'm going to meet you at 7 o'clock on Friday. And that's Monday. And then Thursday, be like, well, we still on for Friday? Because we know that we're prone to break our word. And so we want to check and make sure that plans haven't fallen through or somebody's going to bail out on us or whatever. And so the Lord tells us, look, don't be swearing like that. Now, if you go to Joshua, and there are so many places you can go here, but if you go to Joshua, we've been studying this in our Sunday morning class, and we read through Deuteronomy, which is the second giving of the law. That's after the wandering in the wilderness. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and read Exodus especially, and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and Leviticus has its place, but you can read those to see the storyline unfold here. And so they finished wandering in the wilderness, this punishment for their faithlessness and melting at the terrible report by these 10 faithless spies. And so a 3-week journey turns into 40 years. And after that, there is this re-giving of the law to this younger generation, this newer generation that was born in the wilderness. And then they're going to go in now and take Canaan to be God's promised land. Now you got to go all the way back to Genesis, to Abram, who became Abraham. But even while he was still Abram, is an old man, has no children, is married to a wife who can't have children, and she's old too. And God comes to him and says, I promise you, I am going to make you the father of a great nation, of many nations. Now, there's a lot of problems there and a lot of faith and trust on Abraham's part to keep going along with this and obeying God and following and seeing what he has to unfold. He promises the same to Isaac. He promises the same to Jacob. And there's this land promise, this promised land, literally, that they're going to go to, but it's going to be more than 400 years before this happens. Abraham has no idea about at this time when he's promised, has no idea about Isaac and has trouble getting to having Isaac and the faith that it took there. He has no idea about Jacob, that Jacob's name will be changed to Israel, that eventually a nation will come from Jacob and Isaac and Abraham that will be called Israel. And that whole nation will go into bondage and slavery in Egypt. And this guy Moses is going to go in after them at 80 years old and with his brother Aaron and bring these people out. And they're going to wander and follow God as these newly released slaves. And they're going to show their faithlessness and end up wandering 40 years in the wilderness. And after all that, and God gives this second law, if you will, second giving of the law in Deuteronomy, Moses' successor, Joshua, is going to take them in. They're going to have to fight all of these different people. They're going to have to go to war. They're going to have to follow God in faith and do some things that sometimes don't really make any sense, but God said to do them. And if they do all that, they will have that land to be theirs. And so that's where you get to in Joshua. They've come into Canaan, this promised land that is so wonderful. You say a land flowing with milk and honey. Well, we who live in America, milk and honey are things you find on a grocery shelf. Those are luxuries in those days. And they finally gotten there. All the land has been allotted for the 12 tribes. The city's given to the Levites, and everybody has rested from warring. And here's how this concludes. Now, look, I know that was a whole lot of information, but I'm summing up the first 5 or 6 books of the Bible, and we're talking about hundreds of years here. Here's the point to make back to the original thought of the video. Thus the Lord, in Joshua 21 and verse 43, thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Not one word. Can you imagine having lived your whole life to now and you have never failed on your word, not even once? Now, for me, that's 45 years, or maybe intelligently, since I was responsible, maybe, a little over 35 years, whatever you want to say. That long, never breaking a promise. This is hundreds of years, and not one word failed. He kept every promise. What does that mean? We used to sing, maybe some of you still do, a song called Standing on the Promises. And I really don't know that any of us paid close attention to what we were talking about. Everything we're doing is based on promises. Now, we're looking back at God keeping his promises, of course. He set this record for all the existence of humanity and shown his faithfulness. But these things that he's promised for the future have not come to pass. These promises that he'll be with me, these promises that he'll protect me, these promises of heaven, of this eternal kingdom and eternity, all of these things are still just promises. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3, Peter, before he starts into all the problems they've got to deal with, starts talking about what all is right. And he says, with exclamation that I won't use here because it just feels kind of odd to start hollering into a video camera, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. That same God who promised, no matter how bleak it looked, no matter how dim it got at times, how God may have seemed like he had forgotten his promise or his promises, kept every word. All of the prophecies in the Old Testament, so many of them, more than 300 probably messianic prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, God kept every one of them. And now what's he doing? He's promising you and me that we have this, what does he say? Imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven inheritance for you and me. And that's your promise that you can be sure of. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, or if there's even going to be a tomorrow. In fact, Jesus said, don't worry about all those things. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. All these things will be added to you. And today is sufficient for itself to be concerned about, because we're well aware that God has promised, and that no matter what happens, come the worst possible scenario, we are saved, we are going to heaven. And I don't know that we appreciate that. I don't know that I appreciate that enough, that God has promised and he has never broken his word. That's the God that we served. And hopefully that amazes you. And maybe that's a good start for a Bible study for you and me individually to take on ourselves, is to go back and just note all of these promises kept throughout the Bible and make you appreciate God that much more. You know, your prayers are based on promises. Your prayers are based on promises that God made thousands of years ago, that if you talk to him, it looks like talking to the air to other people, that he's listening, that he's answering, and it's always according to his perfect will. It's a wonderful thing to serve God, and I hope this helps you appreciate it that much more. We want to thank you for being with us today. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't already, please hit this button below to subscribe and keep up with new content. Over here is a recommendation from YouTube and our last release as well. If this video helped, please help our channel by hitting the like button. And for those who are listening on podcast, if you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps get the word out, and that allows us to benefit or help other people with this. And please, everyone, consider sharing this content.